Welcome back to Should We Talk About the Weather, internet radio about chemtrails, politics, and all kinds of other subjects that the mainstream media doesn't like to tell the truth about or even discuss. So that was Overtone with Taken for a Ride, off their album Spectrum from a few years ago now, about 15 years ago. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's been happening with Mike Baird. So there's a protest happening on the 29th of May, so that's this coming next Sunday actually, so a week away at 1:30. And why is that? People are sick to death of what Mike Baird has been doing to New South Wales. I'll just read directly from their Facebook event, and then I'll add my 2 cents. Featuring the compulsory acquisition of homes and heritage buildings for unworkable highways, the destruction of 130-year-old trees and thousands of Indigenous artefacts for Sydney's light rail project, the destruction of livelihoods, small business, venues and our nightlife in the name of puritanical lockout laws that favour no one but Baird's mates at the casino, hence his name Casino Mike, the muzzling of the anti-CSG movement via new anti-protest laws. That's very important because now they've got LRAD cannons, which I'll go into in a minute as well. The unwarranted harassment at our train stations by sniffer dogs, which was carried on from Barry O'Farrell's agenda, which just proves its continuity of government. The further erosion of our civil liberties via the passing of the Serious Crime Prevention Bill that can see you arrested without charge and kept for 14 days based on the hunch of a police officer, coinciding with the opening of a brand new privately built and run prison in Sydney's southwest. So that's a very, very important point there. The erosion of our civil liberties. You can be arrested for something you're not even thinking about doing. You can be locked away for 14 days without charge. And that's, if you think about it, that's extremely dangerous. That's worse than even the Joe years. And if you're not familiar with what's happened in Queensland during the Joe years, I recommend you look up Joe Bjelke-Petersen, Pig City, all those kinds of things about Brisbane and Queensland and the corruption that happened there, which is a different form of what is happening here. It's basically dictatorship, and a very, very dangerous dictatorship at that. It was creeping before, but now it's just lurching and leaping and running towards... Well, it's already achieved a police state, but now it will be North Korea if we don't stop it, basically. And you think I'm exaggerating? What about the LRAD new police weapons that they introduced in the United States recently? And then that seemed to go well at protests there, so they brought them out here. It pumps out noise at about 150 decibels that not only passes the threshold of pain, which is about 130, 140 decibels, it's crippling, it's painful, and it's meant to just be used as a crowd dispersement, but it's actually permanently injuring people, so it's as bad as rubber bullets in a way. So going back to their event page and continuing to read, the privatisation of disability service, the forced amalgamation of local councils, which is another very dangerous thing. I spoke about last week the Inner West, but also in my local area, Wollongong Shell Harbour being merged. People are up in arms about it. People have protested about it. and still it happened anyway. And that's a huge area in comparison to Kiama or Shoalhaven that have tiny populations, about a tenth or less of the size. And they're not being merged. Is it because they're liberal areas, they're right-wing areas perhaps? And Wollongong and Shell Harbour have always been more left-wing or working class areas with the industry around. Probably. And they've always been Labor safe seats. So the Liberals aren't happy about it, so they merge it. And it's happened pretty much everywhere that they've met with opposition to their right-wing opinion. So, continuing on here, the shocking new biodiversity bill. And the more we take lying down, the more he takes from us, which is true. What else will he introduce in the next 3 years? I think we may not even see another 3 years if Mike continues. We'll probably all be locked up. Oh, my dear. So, that's what's happening on the 29th of May at Town Hall in Sydney. So I'm going to try to make that, if I can take the day off work. I hope to see you all there, and if I can't make it, I hope you're there anyway. Now on to another issue which a lot of people don't even recognise as an issue, and that is recognise. The government pushed agenda to put our Indigenous people in the Constitution. Now that may sound like an appealing thing on the outside, but ask yourself, why is government pushing it so hard, and yet the Indigenous people generally are speaking out against it? So this is from Red Flag. It's a left-wing newspaper, and they're generally onto these kinds of issues and generally tell 99% of the truth on these kinds of things. So I'm going to read this article, which is titled, "Recognise an Assimilationist Sham." The closure of 150 Aboriginal communities in Western Australia is just one more example that highlights the sham nature of the federally funded Recognise campaign. The campaign, which is part of the Reconciliation Australia program, seeks to win constitutional recognition for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Recognise describes itself as a people's movement, but the fact that it is supported by mining companies and Tony Abbott, so you can tell this is a little bit old, it came just before Malcolm Turnbull got in, who are leading the assault on Aboriginal rights, says a lot about its real nature. A number of prominent Aboriginal people have come out in support, including Patrick Dodson, I hope I pronounced this correctly, sorry if I don't, Lowetia O'Donoghue and Archie Roach, but many others have called for an outright rejection of the campaign because of its failure to address sovereignty, self-determination and land rights. I'll also add there that Stan Grant also pushes the Recognise campaign, which I'm quite concerned about. Going back to the article. In July 2011, a survey conducted by the National Congress of Australia's First People, which is a member of the NGO Steering Committee for the campaign, identified 3 important policy areas for Indigenous Australians: health, education and sovereignty. 88% of Congress members identified sovereignty and its constitutional recognition as a top priority. However, an expert panel set up to determine the recommendations for constitutional reforms has rejected the inclusion of sovereignty. Any proposal relating to the constitutional recognition of the sovereign status of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples would be highly contested by many Australians, the panel said. The panel is full of rich whites, as well as prominent Aboriginals such as Patrick Dodson, Noel Pearson, and Marsha Langton. It concluded in its 2012 report to then Prime Minister Julia Gillard that any proposal which includes the recognition of Aboriginal sovereignty would not contribute to a more unified and reconciled nation. According to Aboriginal activist and lawyer Michael Mansell, the current constitutional recognition proposal is therefore more about allowing the Australian state to have a more presentable face than providing a benefit to Aboriginals. Mansell, in a 2011 paper, criticised the Recognise campaign, saying that while it allowed the removal of discriminatory race clauses in the Constitution, it is assimilationist in nature. The assimilationist character of Recognise has also been condemned by Aboriginal activist Michael Anderson. In a statement issued in June 2012, Anderson noted that the Recognise campaign was little more than tinkering at the edges of a profoundly racist constitution and offered no solution for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. According to Anderson, the only constitutional reform with the potential for justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people was a sovereign treaty that recognises Indigenous sovereignty, land rights and self-determination. Aboriginal feminist and unionist Celeste Little wrote in a Guardian column last year, "The longer the Recognise campaign goes on, the more I feel it proves itself to be little more than a government-sponsored ad campaign removed from grassroots Indigenous opinion." Little argued that the campaign seemed to be little more than corporate endorsements and photo opportunities for powerful figures to prove how much they like us. The Recognise campaign was similarly rejected by prominent Aboriginal leaders and elders at the November 2014 First Nations Freedom Summit. Attended by more than 100 representatives of Aboriginal communities from around Australia, the primary focus of the Freedom Summit was on the struggle for sovereignty, self-determination and land rights. In a statement issued at the conclusion of the two-day Freedom Summit, members condemned the extreme assaults from all levels of government on Aboriginal communities and called for the resignation of Abbott's Indigenous Advisory Council, saying that there is no grassroots representation of our people at the national level and that the hand-picked council was a farce. The Freedom Summit statement also called for mass grassroots actions in the streets to defend our rights and enforce our vision of self-determining and continuing sovereignty. So, the Indigenous people I've been lucky enough to speak with on the issue have basically said what this particular article is also saying, that they don't want to be recognised in the Constitution, they just want a treaty or sovereignty, and basically the Recognise campaign is a farce. And before I actually spoke with any Indigenous people about it,